Hello, and welcome to the school MTSS and differentiation training for the 2021 school year. MTSS supports District Strategic Plan Goal 1, academic success for all students. We are going to define MTSS, explain the role of SEL in MTSS, identify the teacher's role in MTSS, and briefly look at how your leadership team supports MTSS. The goal for this section is for you to be able to explain how school-wide MTSS supports learning for the whole child for all students. MTSS is about ensuring student success by using evidence-based problem solving to identify student needs and providing evidence-based interventions for students who demonstrate the need for extra support. MTSS is the integration of multiple components of supporting student learning. Response to intervention was created as a way to identify students who struggle academically and provide increasingly intense interventions and academic supports to remediate the student. Proposed as an alternative to waiting for students to fail. Positive behavior interventions and supports, created as a series of tiered supports for student behavior. Social emotional learning, supporting students in their understanding of their own feelings and how others feel. And professional learning communities, teams of teachers who work together to answer the 4 essential questions that support MTSS. What do we want students to know and be able to do? How will we know when they have learned it? What will we do when they have? And what will we do when they haven't? Some past examples of Osceola MTSS triangles are seen on the left. On the right is our current model, which includes social emotional learning. Typically, you have an academic side of the triangle and a behavior side, but this model shows how we should be looking at all areas when problem solving. This is our social emotional learning competency framework. Self-awareness and self-management are how we understand ourselves. Social awareness and relationship skills are how do we work well with others. And then responsible decision making. How do we make good decisions? This slide is a visual of what happens when MTSS is implemented with fidelity and there is equity in student experience. The slide also represents our district mission, which is inspiring all learners to reach their highest potential as responsible, productive citizens.
Tier 1 is core instruction in the general education classroom. Every student is in Tier 1. Professional learning communities are key because MTSS cannot work if Tier 1 instruction isn't high quality and effective. Professional learning communities have to be able to answer 4 critical questions. What do we want our students to know and be able to do? Or identifying the essential standards and creating a unit plan. How will we know if they have learned it? Implementing the teaching and assessing cycle, giving common end of unit assessments. What will we do when they have learned it, and what will we do when they have not? Identifying specific students for specific Tier 2 supports based on specific standards. Differentiation and scaffolding starts at Tier 1. Just because a student needs a scaffold does not mean they need Tier 2 or Tier 3 intervention. Scaffolds allow students to show us what they can do and what they do understand. Providing scaffolds gives teachers more data to help drive decisions about how to support students. MTSS is for all students. Being part of a particular category does not automatically exclude or include a student from Tier 2 or Tier 3. A gifted student may need enrichment for one subject and remediation in another. An ELL student may not need intervention beyond language scaffolds, or the student may be missing foundational skills in reading or math. An ESE student can be successful with academics and need social emotional interventions. Interventions are based on individual needs, not group membership. MTSS requires formative assessment. If you give an assignment and the only thing you are concerned with is the number the student got correct, it is a summative. If you give an assignment and you're looking at and listening for what they did wrong to understand their thinking, so you know what to do next, then it's a formative. Formative and summative assessments are not defined by their title, their gradebook category, or how you give them. Formative and summative assessments are defined by what you do with them. Let's look at Eli's work. Eli is a second grade math student. What do we know about Eli based on what we see? We know he can add correctly. We know he understands place value. We also know he should have subtracted. What we don't know is whether he read the problem and whether or not he can subtract. If I ask Eli to read the problem and after reading it he says, "Oh, I should have subtracted," he probably needs a scaffold to help him learn to read the problem. If he reads the problem and just looks at me, he probably didn't realize it was a subtraction problem, and he may need support with recognizing whether the parts or the whole is missing. If in that moment I tell him it's a subtraction problem and he can find the correct answer, I know he doesn't need help with subtracting. He needs help with reading and understanding word problems. If, on the other hand, I just mark this answer wrong and don't engage in this brief conversation, I won't have the information I need to be able to fill the gaps in his understanding. If I go to my MTSS meeting and the only thing I can tell the MTSS team about Eli is that he failed his subtraction test, the team doesn't have enough data to be able to remediate him efficiently. If I go to the same meeting and I tell the team he needs support with understanding word problems, the team can help to find Eli an individualized and targeted intervention to fill that gap. Tier 2 is the interventions and extensions for those students who need extra time with grade level content or who have mastered the content and need to go deeper. Tier 2 is based in the specific standards from Tier 1. Finally, Tier 2 is supplemental to Tier 1. It's an intervention beyond core instruction. It does not take the place of core instruction. If a student is struggling with the content, we do not remove them from grade level curriculum to provide an intervention. Tier 3 is intensive individualized intervention for those students who have significant gaps in foundational skills. Tier 3 is in addition to Tier 1 and Tier 2. When we increase the level of the intervention, we increase the intensity by changing the content, or we change the materials being used, break the target into smaller pieces, change the process, the group size, the frequency, the instructor, or we change the product, smaller, more frequent assessments, to determine response to the intervention. MTSS is not just the teacher in the classroom and their PLC. MTSS is the whole school. Tiered intervention is just one piece of an MTSS. Your leadership team is working up front with you and behind the scenes to provide the leadership, data, training, and resources that your school needs for a MTSS to work. The 4-step problem-solving process starts with clearly and specifically identifying the problem. Then the problem-solving team analyzes the problem to determine what actions are most likely to have the desired effect. This is when formative assessment and the feedback it provides you as the teacher is so critically important. Step 3 is to design an intervention based on the analysis of the problem, and finally, the team implements and evaluates the intervention to determine whether it is having the desired effect. This year, REA will be providing data to PLCs to help start the problem-solving process.
As we focus on supports for our students with academic needs, we also need to think of our behavior supports in the same way. Behavior is a skill that is taught. Every school has established Tier 1 school-wide expectations that are positive, all-encompassing traits that are applicable for all stakeholders. When I talk about stakeholders, I'm referring to administrators, teachers, professional support staff, students, parents, and community members. We also want to consider our students and our families' cultures when moving forward with those expectations to determine what and how we will teach behaviors. Why do we need to teach behaviors is a question I often hear. Oftentimes, educators think that students should know how to behave. We need to remember that students are bombarded with examples of inappropriate behaviors that pay off for that person that's engaging in them. Here's just a few examples of the why behind teaching behaviors. We want to focus on our cultural differences, understand where students are coming from, the code switching, how I behave at school is different from how I behave at home. We need to think about what they're bringing to the table, the skills that they have that they've been taught at home, and how that differs maybe from what we're expecting at school. Also thinking about the time out of class. When students are out of the classroom, possibly due to some disruptive behaviors, that is going to have a negative impact on their academics. We also want to think about oftentimes students have struggles academically. So when they're trying to do the right thing in class, they may not know exactly what that is. We need to be mindful of teaching that to them. And if you were teaching multiplication, for example, you would give students a task with multiplication to practice. You would then give them feedback onto how they did with that task. You would give them multiple opportunities to practice that task. We need to be mindful of doing that same thing with our behaviors. Model for them, practice, and then reinforce. Be mindful of Harry Wong and what he teaches about learning new behaviors. New behaviors need to be practiced at least 8 times. However, many of our students have already established some behaviors that are not appropriate for what we expect at school. So to unlearn that old behavior and learn a new behavior, that has to be repeated at least 28 times. Change takes time and it's hard. We have to be patient and be encouraging for our students to allow that time to take place. When we're thinking about our students with the challenging behaviors, we need to be mindful of all the tiers we have in place at our schools. We need to remember that Tier 1 is that basic behavior instruction. Tier 2 are for those students who need more support, and then Tier 3 is for those students that need even additional support, much like we would think about them with academics. I like to think of a quote that I heard from a speaker, Dr. Stuart Avalon, who said, "Kids do well if they can. If a student is not doing well, what is it that's preventing them from doing well?" I found an example of a student in our school district, a 6th grader from this past school year. He used ESE, also LY, and in the MTSS triangle. He had 16 referrals and 17 minor infractions. When I went to look and see what kind of interventions had been put in place to help support the student, possibly some things to try to change that behavior, teach those skills that he was lacking, I could not find anything except what was done the previous year in 5th grade. There were no notes put in focus from the social worker, teacher documentation, or counselors. So my questions would be, what do we know about this student? What's going on with that student outside of school? What kind of skills is this student lacking? Possibly tying back to the cause of some of these disruptive behaviors that generated the referrals. And then knowing that the student is ESE, are we providing those same supports that we would provide for our academics? Are we providing them for behavior? So chunking instruction might be a simple one. Are we giving that student some specific skills that they could use, maybe to avoid some impulse control or to get attention in a different way? As we reflect on our MTSS triangle, here are some resources that we use in Osceola County for each of the different tiers. Tier 1, remember, first and foremost are those behavior expectations that are posted around your campus that state positively what you expect for your students. Then we also have different examples there, like second step, peer mediation. Then we might move into Tier 2, students that need additional support. We have restorative practices that are evident in some of our schools. We have a Choice to Change program that's available at nighttime for our students and families. We have check-in and check-out. And then we also have Tier 3 resources. Please be aware that just because a student is in Tier 3, that does not necessarily mean we have to jump to a FUPA BIP. We could possibly look at some other options before we go that route. I think it's important to remember that Tier 1 expectations need to be taught and reinforced with all of our students. And as we begin this school year, reinforcing positive behaviors is critical now more than ever to ensure academic and behavioral success for all of our students.
For the 2020-21 school year, we will be placing students in focus using the MTSS tab. Data collection will begin the second week of school. This year we'll be utilizing a new primary measure, the NWEA MAP Growth Assessment, which is designed to measure the specific areas of instruction that are needed in Tier 2 and Tier 3 for a student to be able to access the core. This information will be placed in focus by your school MTSS teams before the end of September so that we can immediately get to the work of providing specific interventions that are needed to help students in Tier 2 and Tier 3 so that they can succeed at the core in Tier 1 where they're expected to be accelerated. Based on research by NWEA, we are expecting that there may potentially be large academic impacts from the school closures that occurred between March and May from the COVID-19 pandemic, especially in the areas of mathematics. In some grade levels, particularly the 5th to 6th grade transition, students who did not have access to digital learning or were not able to log on and engage on a daily basis with their learning may have experienced up to a year and a half of learning loss. This will be the most felt in 5th, 6th, and 7th grade for next year. In the areas of reading, students between 1st and 4th grade may have major learning loss. Students might be beginning this year further behind than we would traditionally expect at the start of the school year. For this reason, it is critical for us to utilize the formative assessment data provided by NWEA to determine exactly where we want to provide interventions in order to help these students access the core. But it's really critical to remember that in doing so, we also need to provide them with Tier 1 instruction that aligns to the curriculum unit plans, in addition to those Tier 2 and 3 interventions. When building a steel bridge to cross a river, it's not wise to start at one end and build to the other. It would be far more expensive and you risk the chance for a bridge to collapse. Instead, what engineers do is they start building on both sides of the river and they meet in the center, filling in with scaffolding as they need to ensure that the bridge is safely built to allow people to cross that gap. We must do the same thing with our students this year. Provide them strong Tier 1 on one end aligned to the curriculum unit plan to ensure that they are keeping up with grade level standards, while also providing precision Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction aligned to their areas of need so that they can bridge those learning gaps that have been created. To that end, all students in kindergarten through 10th grade will take the NWEA reading and math assessment 3 times this year, in September, in January, and in May. Additionally, students in 3rd through 8th grade will take the science assessment at the same points. The MAP Growth Assessment will inform teachers and instructional leaders as to what students already know and what they're ready to learn. This data is critical to accurately and reliably assessing where our students are learning in comparison to both the national and state norm. This will allow teachers to clearly understand a student's starting place and pinpoint the type of scaffolds that may be needed in order to help ensure that students can access that Tier 1 instruction during their core curriculum time. To further aid teachers in accurately assessing and understanding where students are in their learning, we are going to be implementing a new upgraded version of School City this year. The new version of School City will allow for progress monitoring assessments to be administered digitally to students all across the district. It has new technology-enhanced questions such as graphing points, hot text, drag and drop, and essay prompts, and multi-part questions such as Part 1A and Part B that will allow teachers to assess students in ways that are more aligned with the Florida Standards Assessment. The new Analyze Reports tool will allow teachers to quickly and accurately reach the standards assessment's functionality that previously had to be achieved by entering through the reports page. This can now quickly be accessed through the Assessments tab. Finally, the new Personalized Review Assessments function will provide instant reteaching opportunities and enrichment activities to students within minutes of administering the flexible assessment. You will also find that the new NWEA RIT results will be imported into School City to allow for easy analysis across a variety of parallels, such as looking at equity analyses to ensure that all of your subgroups are learning equally. It is our hope that this utilization of data will allow for new and more precise Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions to be applied to students during the time that we have them, so that they can receive the support that they need to access the core Tier 1 instruction in order to accelerate their learning to make up for the potential COVID slide.